Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another special edition of GEVA Live. I'm your host, John Titus, and welcome. I have three amazing officials here from the GEVA region. I'm joined today by Tim Countryman, Londa Marvini, and Daniel Sam. Thank you all for joining us today.
You're welcome.
So our goal in this series is to ask these amazing officials about some of the misconceptions, the ideas that some of us have about, club volleyball versus USA versus NCAA, and we might even dabble into a little bit of international. So with that said, the four segments we want to talk today about are, do you really have to stay quiet during a serve? What is exactly a double? Where is a coach supposed to stand? How can a coach talk to the officials? Can you even talk to an R1 or R2 or a line judge? And the fourth thing, if we have enough time today, we want to talk about the infamous, how does an injury timeout really work? And which coaches are pushing that idea and which ones are really, really doing it the right way. So again, thank you all for joining me. And I'll open up, Londa Marvini, first of all, thank you for joining us. And we'll start with the infamous, do I really have to stay quiet during a serve in the high school game?
Well, with high school, and I would say any other venue, you don't have to be quiet. The big thing is you can't be berating, you can't be unsporting-like. So, for example, in the action of the serve, you can't do anything that will harass or purposely be done to distract the player from serving the ball. That really pertains regarding the players. Now, with the crowd, I guess you asked kind of the same thing out of them, but as far as obviously with crowd control versus the players on the court, referees have a little more say and can enforce a little more with the players as far as unsporting-like conduct. With the crowds, it's something that the captain is summoned over and then told the issue, then goes to the host team, and the host team has to take care of it, and or the host management, which is usually the athletic director or whoever is in charge of the team currently. If it becomes an issue, the referee does have the opportunity to suspend the game until it's controlled. So that's really the biggest difference as far as the crowd itself getting involved. The big thing is the crowd just can't do what any other player can't do, which is berate, be derogatory, single out players like numbers, because with high school it is, and with any other venue, it is something that you want sporting like conduct from both the players and the crowd there.
Awesome. So Daniel, along the lines that we just heard, in the same sense, so when you see another crowd in high school say, please be quiet during the serve, obviously they're educating their fans the wrong way. But we made a good point. You can be as loud as you want, as rowdy as you want, as long as you're not berating, being rude, being cruel, doing all those harmful things, with your words. But let's say if somebody does cross that line, Daniel, what should a player do if they hear somebody say something inappropriate in the crowd? Where should they go?
Well, one of the things that I usually tell them is to let us know, either the R1 or the R2, and then we'll call the captain, and the captain will go to the coach. We go through the coach and tell the coach that they have to get, the attendance under control. Another thing also in Nassau, I do high school in Nassau, and they do have supervisors at the high schools. So the supervisors are supposed to be handling, the crowd if they get out of hand.
Okay, very good. And Tim, so we talked about the high school side. Now, as the USA club side goes, is the rule similar, the same, very different?
No, not at all. No racial, sexual, or demeaning comments. The sport has become a whole lot more athletic in the time that I've been involved with it. 30 years ago, I'm probably seeing my third generation of players now. Sporting conduct was considered to be quiet, but it's way more athletic. The players feed off of the enthusiasm and bring more noise.
Fair enough. No, good to know. And then I guess, real quickly, any difference anybody want to speak to as far as the NCAA or international side goes? Is it the same there too?
I mean, I'm not too familiar with the international. I would actually assume international is even more lax, but
Mhm.
Bring,
They
bring,
probably
bring, bring noise. It brings up the enthusiasm.
Awesome. So
exactly.
if our viewership has learned anything about this, we want you to enjoy the game. We want you to enjoy the process. Be as loud as you want. Just do it in a proper, polite, manner. Don't cross that line. It's like one of those things. Everybody knows where that line is or should know that line is. Just have fun and don't cross that line. So we appreciate you guys being great fans. So the next one, and this might take a little bit because coaches are always complaining about this, and we could talk about this for hours, but I'm going to keep this segment to 5 minutes, is the infamous 2 fingers up double ball. So, the interpretation as best you guys can, what is a double in each of these rule sets? And I know it's probably one of the toughest calls in volleyball. We can even talk later in the international game. They're even thinking about dropping it and experimenting with that. So that's kind of a cool thing to go into later. But Daniel, in high school, as best you can, what are you looking for as far as a double call?
In my being mentored and the training that I've been to, what they tell you to look at is to look at the contact. So ignore the player's position, ignore the ugliness of the body position, the hand position. You look at the contact, and if you look at the hand on the ball, that will give you an indication whether or not they were double contact at the time that the ball was set or not, right? One of the arguments that I've had with a senior official was about, some people will not only look at the contact, but also looking at the movement of the ball. And the senior official happens to be on this panel today, which is Tim. I was working on him today, one day, and I asked him, what exactly determined to you what a double is? He says, I don't look at spin, but I look at movement. So if you take all of these factors into consideration, and if you look at the hand on the ball, that will give you an indication whether or not they were double contact at the time that the ball was set or not, right? One of the arguments that I've had with a senior official was about, some people will not only look at the contact, but also looking at the movement of the ball. And the senior official happens to be on this panel today, which is Tim. I was working on him today, one day, and I asked him, what exactly determined to you what a double is? He says, I don't look at spin, but I look at movement. So if you take all of these factors into consideration, then it might be easier for you to also call what's a double. But also keep in mind that in today's game, we don't want you, the game is not called as tight as it was about 30 or even 20 years ago, right? So the goal is to let the players decide how the game goes. So you don't want to be too loose and you don't want to be too tight and taking the game away from the players. At least that's the way I envision it when I ref.
Deal. And Londa, same thing on the high school side. Any other interpretation or anything you want us to be aware of as high school coaches watching doubles?
I think with any doubles or any contact calls, again, there's a rule and then there's the spirit of the rule, and you can apply that to anything. Daniel's correct, and Tim's correct. It has to relate directly to the contact itself. A spin doesn't constitute a double. And also you have to take into consideration the level of play, like club. So you have the lower levels, the ages 12, 13, you're going to be a little more lax. Same thing with the high school. You're going to have varsity versus JV, and you want to basically, like Daniel said, let them play. As long as they're staying within the rules to some extent. That's really the biggest things. I'll call based on the level of the match itself. You have 2 lower level teams, you're going to be a little more relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, you might have one setter that's really good, one setter that's really bad, but the one setter that's not considered as clean might have 6'10" players hitting the ball. So you have to take that into consideration too, with the player. And then there's a lot of times the set where it has no bearing on the game because it's low. The only thing they're going to be able to do is roll the ball over. So you take that in consideration too. It's every contact you're constantly thinking about, but ultimately let them play. There is still that factor of spectacular plays. So if you don't want to take that away from the kids. So someone gets a double, but they just ran 30 feet off the court, jumped over one of their players, and they managed to still set it pretty decent, you would let that go probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So Tim, I know, recently, I don't know how many years ago, but quite recently, they added something to the effect of, athletic movement or athletic play or something to that regard in the rules to allow what, Alonda was speaking of. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Sure. And it looks like I'm developing a theme, more exciting play.
Mhm.
A lot of times when we watch a setter's hands, we can see minor imperfections, but somebody sitting in the stands 30 feet away might wonder why the whistle went off. So again, in keeping with the theme of more play, we will let more go, especially if somebody shows athleticism.
Cool. And then Tim, any major differences between high school and USA doubles as far as the rules are interpreted?
As far as the rules are interpreted, no. But by the time you get to USA Volleyball, there's kind of a development in officials. High school officials are a rich source of our officials, and sometimes high school officials don't have as much experience as some of our officials do. And in order to help get them over the first few humps of when to make a call, they're taught certain body positions will result in a double. So if somebody sets with their hands behind their head, probably there'll be a call. If somebody plays a ball underhanded, probably there'll be a call. And when an official gets to our level, what we're trying to teach them is to watch the actual contact and not so much the position of the player. I think probably the greatest thing I've heard lately comes out of the NCAA rules interpreter, who says there's no position that a player can't play a ball legally from, and it's all on the contact, and we're refining our focus to the contact.
Awesome. No, I appreciate that. So thank you for that discussion with that. I think that's always a big one, and I think that resolves a lot of those ideas. So the third topic that we have in this segment is the idea of coach position. So there's kind of, in a sense, three parts of this one. Number one, what coach are we talking about, head coach or assistant coach? Number two, where are they allowed to stand? And number three, are you allowed to talk to the R1 and R2 and when? Because there's even fuzzy areas in that too. And, you hear some people, you can't talk to the R2 at all, but you can, because you can ask them how many subs or timeouts you have. Some things you actually can ask them all the time. So, and it's always difficult to figure out which is which. So hopefully we can shed a little light on that. So in the high school game, Londa, where am I supposed to stand as the head and assistant coach? What am I allowed to talk to, and where can I talk to?
Okay, so like US
standing protocol in high school, and I guess the best question I have is, in high school, can the head coach directly talk to the R1?
In the high school, in the public high school that I ref, we do have an R1 and an R2. So we do not want the coach to actually verbalize something to the R1. So we always want the request or the question to be addressed to the R2, right? We follow NCAA rules. So, we talk to one coach at a time. An assistant coach can talk to us, but there will be only one conversation going at a time. So there should then be a coach and an assistant coach talking to me as an R2 at the same time. Sometimes in high school, you do have a little bit of flexibility because sometimes the R2 does not really fulfill the functions, and you have a coach that knows you based on your experience, might give you a look at what just happened, right? I can't get an answer from our R2. So you might give a discrete signal about what the call was about, and most of the time they're happy about that. What annoys them is when they can get an answer as to what just happened when they don't agree with it.
But
I guess that at every level, right? Sorry, Linda.
If a head coach does want to speak to R1 about a call, it can't be based on a judgment, but they do have to request a timeout. And if they do request a timeout and it's overruled, then the timeout is removed. But if it's still in the favor of the R1, then the timeout stands.
Understood. Good to know. Okay. Another little side note that I just thought about talking about this topic is, in high school, can my captain call a timeout, or can that only come from the head coach?
As far as high school goes, the captain can request a timeout and actually request a lineup check too.
Okay.
The
Awesome.
same.
Can a coach request a lineup check in high school?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
they can. Yes, they
Good
can.
to know. Good to know. Awesome. All right, Tim, same. Oh my gosh, there was like 5 questions in there, Tim. Good luck in taking on all of them. But same questions in USA. Coaching protocol, coaching engagements with referees, captains, people to call timeout, all that good stuff.
Yeah. We're going to bring in all the rule bodies now between FIVB, USA, Federation, high school, NCAA. This is one place where there truly are some significant differences with USA and FIVB as compared to the other 3 organizations. Head coaches are the only ones that are authorized to discuss with the referees. Assistant coaches are there to coach players, not referees. I think we talked a little bit about sporting conduct and issuing cards. Another of our significant differences is that for USA Volleyball, cards are applied once during a match and it sticks for the whole entire match. So if somebody misbehaves in the first set, their rope is already extended, where in the high school rules, NCAA, they get a fresh start in the next set.
Good to know. Good to know. All right. Thank you. Let's see. We can go now towards the final segment of this show and the infamous injury timeouts and what is the proper protocol in each of these things. As a coach, when do I have to use a regular timeout versus an injury timeout? How do I request an injury timeout? Who determines? I assume it's the official, whether the injury is an injury or needs to be a regular timeout. So this is always a tough one. And I myself am always very confused on this too. So Londa, high school, there's a minor injury that the referee doesn't notice on the court. A player, hurt their pinky, sprain their pinky. What happens next in that case?
So the big thing with high school is the safety of the players. So no matter what, if you think there is an injury, and especially if it's hindering the player themselves or other players from they possibly could get injured, you stop the play immediately. You always can go ahead and issue a replay, and you should. But immediately, if you see a player that looks injured, even if they play ball and they're kind of limping around, but it looks like they're okay, you're better to be safe than sorry. Stop the game, issue a replay, but within that injury, the coach has 30 seconds to decide whether or not the player can remain. Within that 30 seconds, then if the player cannot remain, you give them all the time they need to get that player off the court. If there's not enough players to continue the game with the 6 players, then they're issued a 3-minute injury timeout.
Understood. Daniel, anything to add on that part as far as the high school injury timeout goes?
No, it's the same thing. We allow them to evaluate. There's an evaluation time at 30 seconds. We are told never to stop the 30-second on time and give them the
from they possibly could get injured. You stop the play immediately. You always can go ahead and issue a replay, and you should. But immediately, if you see a player that looks injured, even if they play ball and they're kind of limping around, but it looks like they're okay, you're better to be safe than sorry. Stop the game, issue a replay, but within that injury, the coach has 30 seconds to decide whether or not the player can remain. Within that 30 seconds, then if the player cannot remain, you give them all the time they need to get that player off the court. If there's not enough players to continue the game with the 6 players, then they're issued a 3-minute injury timeout.
Understood. Daniel, anything to add on that part as far as the high school injury timeout goes?
No, it's the same thing. We allow them to evaluate. There's an evaluation time at 30 seconds. We are told never to stop the 30-second on time and give them the leeway of waiting for the coach or the trainer to get on the court. And then 30 seconds, you try to get an answer. It's always a touchy situation, especially with a serious injury. Now you're asking, what exactly you're going to do with that player when it's pretty obvious that the player cannot continue, right? So very serious injury. Everybody knows that it's very unlikely that player will be able to continue, but you still have to get a verbal confirmation from the coach that they're going to substitute that player, and after that you walk away. So it's always very touchy as to how you approach that situation. But again, it's a 30-second evaluation. Then you need to get an answer, and then you need to notify the R1 as to what the decision is. There is a substitution that's going to take place, or the player is going to continue. If the player is going to continue, then after the 30-second, everybody has to be in position to continue play. And if the player is on the floor, then you walk away. And if it takes 2 hours for that player to get off the court, then it takes 2 hours. In the extreme case, you do not rush them off the court. That's not the way that situation is handled.
Yep, very good.
And if it's a serious injury, summons the players back to the bench.
I like that idea too. Perfect. Do either of you want to speak on in high school? If I only have 7 kids, and same situation in club, and I'll let Tim speak on that next, is in high school I only have 7 players. One of them is a libero. Is there an exceptional substitute rule that exists that people should be aware of?
Yes.
And could you explain that a little bit for those of us that don't know how that works?
Sure. For example, if it's an exceptional sub, at that point, there's that pecking order, and if the player's injured, first off, the player if there was a substitution, that original player comes back on the court. Then secondly, you can go ahead and have you can have a player that has played a different position come onto the court. And then the third is, of course, the libero, unless the libero at any point was disqualified.
Understood. So yeah, same idea. So, as if I have an able body on my bench, they need to play. But if I don't, I can kind of take any player from any position to fill that spot if somebody's able to do so.
And the exceptional sub, if there's the team still has substitutions, it does count as a sub. If they don't, then it doesn't.
Understood. So actually, in theory, you could get an extra sub.
I'm sorry?
The scenario that you talked about is about 7 players. So you're talking about 6 players and a libero. That's at least that's the way I understood it. So if the libero is on the court, one thing that I would add to what Linda said is to get the replacement taking place, and then you can have the exceptional sub, right?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Tim, anything else?
Quick, if you have to have 6 players to start the match. If a player is injured, and let's say you do only have 6 and you go down to 5, you still can continue to play. You just do a rotation, and of course, the loss of rally.
Cool. That's an awesome little rule that a lot of people aren't aware of too in volleyball. That you got to start with 6, but you can finish with 5. Mm-hmm. Tim, anything to add on that as far as club goes, as far as exceptional sub rule? Starting with 6, ending with 5, all the same stuff in USA.
Sure. There's some subtle difference. The other maximum number of subs are used. I stammer over that because each organization has a different number of subs. If there are no other pure subs, legal subs, logical subs where somebody had been out before, then you can take a player that's on the bench and put that player in place of the injured player. Libero is always your last option for an exceptional sub. And we mentioned, but we didn't really talk about an injury timeout, the 3-minute injury timeout. Mm-hmm. That's reserved for when there's no possibility of subbing in any way, either legal or exceptional.
Understood. Good deal.
And 30 seconds is also a little bit different for USA Volleyball. This is one place where we've gone in the kinder, more gentle route. We started with 30 seconds, but we were instructed that that's 30 seconds of evaluation, not 30 seconds from the time you hear somebody go kerplop on the floor. So we allow the trainers to get out, then we start to watch. USA took away the 30 seconds and substituted a reasonable amount of time. So a reasonable amount of time may vary depending on the type of the injury.
Understood. And so, Tim, when it says a reasonable amount of time, that is up to the official's discretion, the R1's discretion on that?
Absolutely. I always start by giving the history of that rule and saying 30 seconds is a reasonable amount of time. But if somebody got blood on their uniform, for example, and they had to duck behind the bench to change a jersey, then maybe 45 seconds is a reasonable amount of time. But you're right. It becomes an official's judgment, which is a good thing because we don't want to push somebody out of a match over a few seconds.
Okay. So me as a coach, then, if I do have, an injury on the court, and I think I need, a little bit of time to help my player out, to evaluate my player, just something as simple as saying to the R1, hey, may I have an injury timeout? And that's the best way to go.
Absolutely.
Fair enough.
And remember, the injury timeout is only after you're out of players. When you're out of either regular or exceptional subs.
Awesome. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us in this, first of many, GEVA live segments with our officials. I'm John Titus. Pleasure to have Tim, Londa, Daniel joining me, and we'll definitely see you guys again soon. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Okay, thank you, John.
Thank you.